Hey guys, how's it going?
How are you? Thanks for having us.
Hello. First and foremost, I do want to say thank you to Social Media Week Toronto for having us here today. It's honestly, it's such a humbling experience to be able to share the stage with such great presenters. And thank you to all of you guys who I'm sure are patiently awaiting lunch to begin. My name is Matthew Manouge. I'm a creative director at Blue Ant Media, in particular for Blue Ant's social and content agency known as Blue Ant Plus. And I'm represented over here by this very colorful right brain.
I'm Adam Main. I'm the managing director of operations at Blue Ant Plus, and I'm analytical, so I get the somewhat more organized gray side of the brain, left brain.
But you know what? There's a lot going on in that.
Thank you, Matt.
More than I can fathom.
Thank you.
So the title of our presentation is How to Produce for Ad-Resistant Eyeballs. And we wanted to specifically talk about branded content. So how to produce branded content for ad-resistant eyeballs, which also goes to say, how do you create content that people actually want to watch? Now, the reason why both the left and the right brain of Blue Ant Plus are here today is because we believe at Blue Ant, when you're creating content or branded content, you have to employ both sides of your brain equally. You can't separate the creative from the analytical. Now, here is the very hard and uncomfortable truth when it comes to branded content. And that's that branded content sucks.
Come on now, Matt.
I'm not done yet.
Oh.
Poo emoji.
I think that's a little harsh. I mean, we make branded content. We're going to show some pretty great examples of branded content today. Why don't we soften this a bit? Why don't we say something like, most branded content sucks, and change that to like a purple unicorn poop emoji. There you go. A little softer.
I like it. It's more optimistic. Yes, not all branded content is terrible and is bad. A lot of that was for effect. But if we're honest with ourselves, a lot of it is. Many advertisers have yet to truly understand how to make effective content that consumers won't want to skip, especially when it comes to branded content. And that's because your average piece of branded content thinly disguises advertising as storytelling. Now, we've all seen this from time to time, and yes, even we are guilty of it.
We're perfect, Matt, come on.
Sure.
Yeah.
But it's important to note that, branded content is not the same as your TVC spot. It's not a billboard. It shouldn't drive to your latest menu item or promote your upcoming Black Friday sale. Now, it might be a part of a larger strategy that does all of those things, but that's not its specific purpose. Rather, the purpose of branded content is that it should focus on the values of the brand, not its products or services. And I'm going to repeat this because this is the theme throughout the next 20 minutes, is that branded content should focus on the values of the brand. And I want to show you guys an example of a piece of content that does this very, very well. Now, most of you have probably seen this at one point in time. It's an oldie but a goodie. It's from Dove, but it's just as relevant today as it was back in 2013 when it was first made.
I showed up to a place I'd never been, and there was a guy with a drafting board.
We couldn't see them, they couldn't see us.
Tell me about your hair.
I didn't know what he was doing, but then I could tell after several questions that he was drawing me.
Tell me about your chin.
It kind of protrudes a little bit, especially when I smile.
Your jaw.
My mom told me I had a big jaw.
What would be your most prominent feature?
I kind of have a fat, rounder face.
The older I've gotten, the more freckles I've gotten.
I would say I have a pretty big forehead.
Once I get a sketch, I say thank you very much, and then they leave. I don't see them.
All I had been told before the sketch was to get friendly with this other woman, Chloe.
Today I'm gonna ask you some questions about a person you met earlier, and I'm gonna ask you some general questions about their face.
She was thin, so you could see her cheekbones. And her chin, it was a nice, thin chin.
She had nice eyes. They lit up when she spoke.
Cute nose.
She had blue eyes, very nice blue eyes.
So here we are. This is the sketch that you helped me create, and that's a sketch that somebody described of you.
So yeah, that's...
She looks closed off and fatter, sadder too. The second one looks more open, friendly, and happy.
So that was a sort of very emotional, beautiful piece, but it was a piece that communicated the brand's values. And as Matt said, that is the point of branded content. Branded content should not have to multitask. The more KPIs or objectives that we load onto our content, the further away from that objective we get. And in fact, the least likely we are at actually achieving any of those KPIs that we give them. So please don't multitask. I mean, I'm the analytics guy. I've seen thousands of campaigns that we run. If you want to get video views, make a great video. If you want to drive people to a website, make a bunch of ads designed to drive people to a website. But those are almost never the same pieces of content if you want them to perform as best as they can. And that's because your content is part of an ecosystem. We all know this funnel. We don't have to go through it. But you have tactics as a brand up and down the funnel. Each one of those tactics should have its own creative and its own content. No multitasking. So now you're thinking, okay, we're showing our values. We're not multitasking. We're good, right? No, we're still in an environment where ads are everywhere, and people hate them. It's like dog hair. But you have to embrace the dog hair. As we said in the intro, the notion that people dislike advertising is not a negative one. It's a realistic one, and as advertisers, we need to know that. Making branded content, we need to acknowledge that. The good news is that making great content is actually the antidote to that advertising problem. Great content cuts through the clutter. And it's backed up by some stats. I couldn't leave you without talking about some stats. This is from Nielsen. Branded content has almost a 60% higher brand ad recall rate, and 14% of people who see branded content will seek out more content from that same brand.
Now, I want to pivot for a moment to talk about what makes content worthwhile, what makes a story good. Now, it's important to recognize that the concept of story, it's not a frivolous thing. Stories aren't just pieces of fleeting entertainment that are meant to distract us from the day-to-day world. Rather, story is actually a technology that evolved to suit a need. Now, hear me out on this one. Much like alphabet and language, or in later years, the printing press and internet, like them, story is a technology that evolved so that we could pass on necessary information about our world. In evolutionary terms, when our DNA was still being hammered out, a good story was the difference between life or death. It's what allowed us to communicate what was happening around us before we even had a means of recording it, which means that our brains are hardwired to recognize good storytelling when we hear it, and to be able to remember it through generations. So I ask the question again, what makes a story good? Well, a good story typically has 4 elements to it. The very first is that it has to be relatable. You have to be able to see yourselves, a viewer has to be able to see themselves within the story. Now, in the theatrical world of professional wrestling, which, yes, I admit, I still watch because I am 12, the blue-collar character of Stone Cold Steve Austin became a household name in the late 90s. It became pop culture because he had a very relatable story where he stood up to his boss, the maniacal, evil billionaire Mr. McMahon. This story was pop culture and relatable because I dare say who here hasn't had a horrible boss at some point in time? Who here hasn't had authority that they've wanted to stand up against? Who here hasn't wanted to give that authority the bird? Now, unrelated note, but I don't find this story relatable because I love my boss. He is somewhere in the audience.
There you go.
His name is Mitch. I'm going to move on. But your story has to be relatable first and foremost. Number two is novel. Now, when we say novel, we're not saying that you have to reinvent the wheel, but you do have to have an interesting perspective, an original perspective, if you want to stand out, which is why self-aware marketing can be so effective. If you look at a brand like Buckley's, when every other brand is trying to pull the wool over a consumer's eyes and sell, a brand like Buckley's that is self-aware, it's silly, and it's honest, is able to create content that truly stands out. Third is your story has to be simple, easy to digest, told in a simple narrative and in a simple language, sometimes in no language at all. I would go as far as to say that 9 out of 10 of the best pieces of branded content are just as effective if we watch them on mute and ignored the subtitles. And this is actually very important to note because as consumers, how do we consume content on our phones? Oftentimes without audio. And the last in creating a good story is tension. Now, we all have hardships in our life. We all have struggles, things that we are trying to overcome, no matter how serious or silly as they may be in Jordan Peele's case. If you can show in your content how universal those struggles are, if you can show that an audience isn't alone in trying to overcome those struggles, then you will surely be able to win their attention.
So now we know the elements of a great story. But how do we bring a brand into that framework? Well, that's what we're going to talk about for the rest of the presentation. And at Blue Ant Plus, we really follow 3 principles that help guide us through the process of making great branded content. And those are know who you are, know who you're talking to, and know what you want to say. So we're going to dive into each of those in a bit more detail right now.
So the first principle is know who you are, which might sound pretty obvious, but you would be surprised how often this gets overlooked. And I love this quote, think of brands as human personalities. As people, you, I, Adam, Mitch somewhere watching, we all have things that define us. We all have our likes, our dislikes, our tone of voice, our style, but more importantly, we have things that we stand for, our core values. As a brand, you need to have these equally as defined because that's going to shape what types of conversations you should be having, i.e. the type of content that you should be making. Where a brand falls into the trap is when they don't have this defined and they start making content that, quite frankly, is disingenuous. Now, a brand who I really, really admire their content is Patagonia. Now, Patagonia is an outer athletic wear company, but they have such a deep understanding of their core values that they're able to make content that is quite risky for others, but it pays off for them. They're able to make content that is thought-provoking, content that is sometimes politically charged, and they're able to deal with very sensitive subject matters. And I want to show you an example of a piece of their content.
I'm not a person who chains herself to trees or anything like that, but if you're doing stuff to help activists, you're definitely an activist yourself. This area is so under threat.
We don't support further lockups of our forests.
It's high time. This destructive industry was made part of history.
It's almost like you're behind enemy lines being a conservationist in Tasmania.
Again, a great example of a brand sharing its values with the audience. So the second principle is know who you're talking to. And let's get it out of the way right off the bat. You're not talking to everybody. You can't make everybody happy. We got a good slide for this. Oh yeah, you're not a jar of Nutella. You can't make everyone happy. And
Nutella makes me very happy.
Yeah, I mean, unless you have a nut allergy, which maybe there are some limitations there. But you can't make everyone happy, and that's okay. Every story that's ever been told has been told with a specific audience in mind. So you have to know that audience and hit it out of the park when you're actually talking to them. And knowing your audience means going far beyond the demographics. Too often, we're just focusing on age, gender, some affinity attributes, and location. But you need to seek out what your audience values, what their values are, what moves them, what makes them tick. Because when people see content that aligns with their values, they're drawn to it. There's a magnetism there. I think we can all kind of maybe picture that in our own life. But the good news is that's not just an anecdotal thought or a hunch. There's science that goes behind why the alignment of values is so powerful. And that's something that happens in our brain, and it's called this very complicated thing called the reticular activating system, or RAS for short. And it is a mouthful, but it's worth remembering, because this, more than anything, could mean the difference between your content getting ignored or your content getting absorbed. So what is it? Well, it's a physiological process that happens in your brain, and it decides what we pay attention to. Think about it. At any given moment, there's so much data bombarding our brains that we don't have the power to consciously decide. Right now, all of you are experiencing some ambient sounds from inside the auditorium, the sensation of your back and your butt against the chair, the subtle smells of everyone around you. You're thinking about lunch, what you're going to do for the rest of the day, the rest of the week, the weekend. And if I'm lucky, the words I'm saying right now are somewhere in the mix. And that's where the RAS comes in. It decides without a flicker of conscious thought what you pay attention to. But how does it do that? It actually scans the environment for anything that aligns with, wait for it, that's right, your values. That's why we're talking so much about values. Because if you're a brand and you can clearly communicate your values and those values line up with your audience, like this Nike campaign, you will create content that people watch and, more importantly, people remember. But the good news is that not all values are kind of risky political or social ones that could get your brand into hot water. Human beings have so many values. Really, values are anything that anybody holds as important to them. And I'm not talking about physical things. These are the things that make you tick. So let's think of an example, like a car, for example. To a family, their values aren't in that car. Their values are the ability to take their family, their kids, back and forth from school safely. For another person, it could be a status symbol or the ability to allow them to explore, because that's deep in their personality. Values can really be anything that anybody finds important. And so here's an example of a campaign that we did with Axe. They wanted to reach a slightly more mature, older audience than they're used to reaching. So we did a content series with them that focused on certain values. The values of having the courage to follow your dreams, the pride that comes from entrepreneurship and seeing something come to life. And of course, with Axe, we had to keep it really still, cool, and sexy. So let's check this out.
When I saw my drawings come to life, that was when I realized I could build an empire. I've always been a bit of a rebel. When I went to high school, I remember I dyed my hair with really hot pink, and I got sent to the office immediately. They said I was disturbing the other students. That was kind of the starting point for me. I've just never really liked rules. I've always liked the idea of custom things and really just making things that are exactly what I want. I only had enough money to survive for a few months. After that, I was toast. I was broke, but I didn't care. I saw the opportunity to be free, to be creative every day, and really just to create my own rules. Passion was 99% of the reason for success. Without that, I would have never survived. Stick to your guns and fight for your own happiness.
He's a handsome fella. So our last principle is know what you want to say, which also means have something to say. As advertisers, we often feel the need to be always on, which, there's not necessarily anything wrong with that. But if you're going to be always relevant. Have something relevant and genuine that you're communicating to your audience. And recognize that in today's world of clutter, a person's time and their attention is very valuable. So the content that you create has to offer them something in return. It has to be of equal value to them. So when you're creating content, take a step back, be subjective, and actually ask yourself, what am I offering in this piece of content to my audience? Now, maybe you're offering the gift of entertainment, which is great because we all need an escape from time to time. But, do yourself a favor and really examine your content and say, is this entertaining? Would people legitimately want to watch this if it wasn't being served to them as an ad? Now, oftentimes when we're creating content, we like to ask ourselves if it has legs. Is it laugh out loud or edgy or gripping, or is the content sexy, as Shane Vitale happens to be, right? Now, sexy can also mean a multitude of different things. It could be, is it cinematically beautiful? Is there something innovative that you're doing in it that makes it quote unquote sexy? Now, what if you look at your content and you say, okay, well, it's not really any of those things, and I'm not necessarily going for quote unquote entertainment? Then once again, ask yourself, what am I offering in this content? Is it thought-provoking? Are you trying to elicit a thought or start a conversation? Is it inspiring or emotional or heartfelt? Are you trying to make your audience feel something inside of them? Or is it educational? Are you trying to teach your audience something? Just like this last video of branded content teaches us where ice cream comes from.
This is where your ice cream comes from. The creamy poop of a mystic unicorn. Totally clean, totally cool, and soft served straight from a sphincter. They're good at pooping. But you know who sucks at pooping? You do. That's because when you sit on a porcelain throne, this muscle puts a kink in the hose and stops the Ben and Jerry's from sliding out smoothly. Is that a problem? I don't know. Are hemorrhoids a problem? Because sitting at this angle can cause hemorrhoids, bloating, constipation, and a buttload of other crap. And seriously, unicorn hemorrhoids? The glitter gets everywhere. But what happens when you go from a sit to a squat? Voila, this muscle relaxes and that kink goes away faster than Pegasus laying sweet sherbet dookie. Now your colon's open and ready for battle. That's because our bodies were made to poop in a squat, and now there's a product that lets you squat in your own home. Introducing the Squatty Potty. No, Squatty Potty is not a joke. And yes, it will give you the best poop of your life, guaranteed. I don't just mean you bloated lords and hemorrhoidal ladies. I mean everyone. Kink, unkink. Kink, unkink. It's simple science. Really.
So I love that video, and that must mean it aligns with my values. I don't know if I love ice cream or if I
It is a game changer of a product as well, guys, so.
He's the official spokesperson for Squatty Potty. No, it aligns with my values, things that are high on my value list. It was funny. It was lighthearted. It didn't take itself too seriously, but it did get the point across. And I think if you like that video, you probably have some of those things near the top of your value list as well. So to recap, if you want to make really great branded content, you need to try to follow the 3 principles we've outlined. Know who you are. That means knowing your values as a brand and communicating those values to your audience. Know who you're talking to. That means going beyond the demographics, really taking the time to learn what your audience values and making sure that your messaging connects and aligns with those values. You have to engage the RAS. And the last thing is know what you want to say. Tell a compelling story. If you're able to do these 3 things, you'll be making content that cuts through the clutter. If you're able to do these 3 things, you'll be making content that people actually want to watch. Thank you very much.
Thank you, guys.